So Shando, you and I have been working together I was actually trying to work it out the other day, to be honest, how many years you and I have actually been working together. And I seem to recall it's probably about 10 years, maybe going on 12.
Yes, it's about since you started doing what you were doing and I started doing what I was doing. And for those of you who don't know, I started running at a running club many, many years ago, and Paula was the captain of the running club. And that's how we met. And despite my best efforts or her best efforts, she's still not rid of me. And as far as working on mental health, well, I've gave her a whole practice on her own by working on me. So yeah, that's how Paula and I know each other.
Yeah, and I refer all my clients that I work with that are either contemplating or considering divorce, or just want to know more from a divorce point of view, or from a child maintenance point of view, or even also people that are looking to get married. So I refer all of my clients to Shando to help them with the legal side of things, because I know that they are in good hands. And so we've also done some TV together, and we've done some radio together as well.
Yes, and for some strange reason, they keep on inviting us back. I think it's because I've got a face for radio, and Paula actually knows what she's talking about. Now, I think where there's a lot of synergy between Paula and I's practice is I send a lot of people to Paula, and Paula sends a lot of people to me. So, and I think the one question that when Paula sends me people, the one question that often comes up is when people sit with me is, when should I get divorced? When should I consider getting divorced? And if I can just, Paula, if that's okay with you, if I can just jump in on that. And that's a question that I get a lot. When people sit across from me, it's, should I get divorced, or why should I get divorced? And what I always say to them is, one of the things we have to prove to the court is if there's been an irretrievable breakdown of the marriage. And if we can't prove to the court that the marriage is broken down irretrievably, the court won't grant an order of divorce. And people don't actually know that. And one of the clear things of when there's been an irretrievable breakdown is what you're actually saying is, if you go for counseling, or you've gone for counseling, it hasn't fixed things. The situation is as bad as it was before, possibly worse. And combined with that, if there's been addiction or violence, I think that is a clear indication. And addiction and violence quite often go together. You get various addictions, from addiction to porn to actual addiction to physical substances. And combined with that, there's some form of violence or abuse. Now, if that's long-standing and you've gone for counseling and there's no help, then, get out of it. You deserve better. And I think sort of leading into that, where people always ask me, and again, this is where Paula comes into the situation, is what are the red flags in a relationship? Maybe, Paula, you can talk to them about that.
Yeah, generally when couples come to see me, they're invariably in a bad space already. And research has shown that traditionally, or a couple of years ago, if you've ever heard that cliche about the 7-year itch, well, that was research years ago, where around the 7-year mark, couples started to hit I call them speed bumps. Their relationship started to hit a wobble. And this was generally because couples had now settled into their relationship, and children had come along, children had changed the dynamics of the relationship, and couples invariably over time, which is what happens often, is end up growing apart instead of growing together. Whereas now the research is showing that it's actually happening between the 3 to 5 year mark. So it's becoming sooner or earlier in the relationship that couples start hitting those speed bumps. And the red flags are when you are arguing or fighting a lot, when you feel like you're walking on eggshells, when you just feel drained energy-wise, like you've tried to resolve things and the same issues keep coming up time and time again. And you've tried to fix it. Maybe you've even been and had a few counseling sessions or coaching sessions before. It's helped for a bit of time, but then you kind of go right back to square one. And it's the same sort of cycle and pattern that happens over and over again. And invariably over time, because relationships don't break down overnight. They break down over time, because over time, relationships get into a routine can become a rut, and a rut can become complacency. And this is where eventually couples just start investing in their own time and their own interests, and they don't invest in each other and invest into their relationship. And they start growing apart and they become disconnected. So the relationship space between two people or the couple is where your relationship lives. And when you don't invest time into that space and into each other, invariably over time, you become distant and you grow apart, and there's actually very little keeping you together. And that's when the speed bumps start becoming more and more frequent and more often. And we start taking on board different coping mechanisms Shando referred to. And coping mechanisms can be anything from sport to hobbies to work to addictions, whether it's addictions such as substance abuse, so things like alcohol, right down to hardcore drugs, pain medication, things like social media. Right now, I'm seeing in a lot of couples, social media is coming up as the third person in the relationship, because people get a connection through their phones to the other person or people on the other side that they're not getting from their partner. So there's very little connection, and that's when relationships start hitting a speed bump. And often couples come to me when it's a bit too late, almost, where there's too much water under the bridge, there's too much damage done, and couples find it, or individuals find it very hard to forgive and to let go and to move on. Potentially affairs have taken place, and a lot of couples find it very hard to come back from that. Although I have had couples that have been through situations like that where they have come back from it and they've turned their relationship around 360, and their relationship is stronger than what it was before. So there's lots of things that happen along the way that cause couples to end up in my office or invariably in Shando's office.
Paul, if I can just jump there, and you know, I've actually had a lot of discussion about this. Would you ever recommend a trial separation?
Trial separations can work, but there's got to be some very I don't want to say strict criteria, but there's got to be very clear objectives and criteria around the trial separation. Often couples will use a trial separation to actually exit the relationship. Whereas if you're going to go through a trial separation, it's to give each other a bit of space and time to reflect and think and assess and analyze and what wasn't working, what can I do differently, how can I create a different outcome, and to have a very specific time frame for that trial separation. Otherwise, it will go on endlessly forever, and you're never going to really achieve anything other than the relationship fizzling out. So it can work, but you need to have very clear objectives around why you want a trial separation and what do you ultimately want to achieve by having a trial separation period.
Yes, and of course, one of the rules I think that I don't agree with a trial separation. I myself have seen that generally when people have a trial separation, then they stray further out of the bonds of marriage. Or let's say someone had an affair and have a trial separation, then during that time of loneliness, they go back to the person they had an affair with. I think if you're going to stay in it, you have to gut it out. That trial separation is a step in the wrong direction for me. And a lot of times it's after people have had that trial separation that they end up in my office. So obviously that's where Paula and I I asked that question specifically because Paula and I have a little bit of disagreement about that. But I think if you're going to stay in it, you have to gut it out. You can't run away and then say, oh, it's going to get better when we're not together. You know, you've got to put your head down and do the hard yards. And of course, coming back into that, a lot of times when people are in my office, and if I don't believe that there's been an irretrievable breakdown in marriage, especially if they have children, I will then not proceed with the divorce until the people have actually been to Paula and have done the hard yards. That's something I'm quite sticky on. And a good divorce and a matrimonial attorney will actually, for the most part, try and talk you out of the divorce if there hasn't been violence or there's no addiction. And like Paula says, you're just hitting a bump in the road. A good divorce and matrimonial attorney will try and talk you out of the divorce, and so they should. So Paula, if I can ask you then, coming back into it, what would you say, what do you need to build a healthy relationship? Because people also, funny enough, as a divorce lawyer, ask me that quite often.
Yeah, I think there's a perception out there that a healthy relationship means that there's no conflict, which is totally unrealistic. A healthy relationship means we're always going to be in love with each other, or we're always going to be, it's going to be good, and we're going to live the happily ever after. And that's a complete myth. It's unrealistic, because like life has ups and downs, so too do relationships have ups and downs. And part of the journey and path of a couple growing together is learning to manage the speed bumps, as I call them, and being able to resolve conflict. So part of building a healthy relationship is communication skills and being able to communicate with each other effectively and respectfully, and then being able to resolve conflict in a way that is constructive, not destructive. Often couples, when they get stuck in that, I call it the washing machine cycle, where it's for a couple of days or weeks, it's good, and then we hit the speed bump, and then we become disconnected, and there's arguing and fighting and screaming and silent treatment and all those kind of things, and then we kind of kiss and make up, and then we start the process and the cycle all over again. And it really is about learning to resolve conflict in a way that is healthy and constructive and respectable, and that it's okay if you don't agree on everything, because the reality is you're never ever going to agree on everything 100% of the time, all of the time, because you are individuals. So at the same time, in a relationship is respecting each other's individuality, but at the same time coming together and co-creating the us, the we, and the ours where the relationship is concerned.
Okay, that makes sense. Also, another thing, Paula, and you and I have also talked about this, is when people come to me and they say, should I not get divorced? What they're actually asking is, what should I consider? Now, a divorce is, let me give it to you straight, a divorce is a terrible thing to go through. I think there's a list of 5 bad things that can happen to you in your lifetime. Divorce is number 3. The first one is death of a child or a loved one. Unexpected death. The second one would be bankruptcy, and the third one would be divorce. And I've had situations where the one has led to the other. All 3 have gone together, and people have actually made it through it. I've sent them to you, and at the end of the day, they've actually learned to deal with it. But one of the things when you're going to go through divorce is you've got to take a hard, long look at your finances. That's where you've got to start. And a lot of times, and I also always find this curious, is that the reason people are getting divorced is the lack of finances, but quite often the person, usually the custodial parent, then wants 20,000 Rand a month maintenance for the children, which that 20,000 Rand a month wasn't there before. I mean, and I always ask them, okay, well, so where's it supposed to come from now? And then they sit there dumbstruck, as if the divorce is financially going to upgrade them. You know, people watch movies or they get 5-star advice, 5-star legal advice at the hair salon that so-and-so after the divorce got a house and a car and an aeroplane. Yes, okay, but there were 4 aeroplanes, 6 houses, and 7 cars before the divorce. You know, if those things weren't there before the divorce, they're not going to magic out of the sky and suddenly be there, especially not if one of the reasons you're getting divorced is financial strain, which is a bloody big reason these days. You know, money is becoming a scarce commodity. So what you've got to do is there's sort of a checklist you've got to go through. First thing you've got to do is you've got to write down the assets that you own and the assets that you own jointly. Then you've got to look at your monthly expenses. That would be your household expenses, your travel expenses, and also what the children cost. Now, maintenance for children is divided into 3 broad areas. There's your consumables, water, lights, electricity, and your nanny. Then there's your academic costs, which is your biggest costs. That's your school fees, school uniform, stationery, which these days include an iPad, extramural equipment, school tours. And these days, no child is normal unless their therapists have therapy. So there's that. And then there's also your extra lessons, school tours, and things like that. So you've got your consumables, you've got your academic costs, and then you've got your medical, which is medical aid and costs not covered by medical aid or when medical aid runs out. And that's how the court looks at sort of maintenance for children. So you've got to work at how much the children costs, and then you've got to go back to your joint assets and you've got to see what you want to happen to these joint assets. Now, joint assets are credit cards. Joint assets, by the way, debt's also an asset. People forget that. It's a negative asset, but your joint debts and you've got to start deciding what's going to happen to them. And the fight always comes around, who gets the house and what happens to the house. If you own joint property together, there's like three things that could possibly happen to that property. The one is the person who wants to retain the property has to buy the other person out. That's how it works. Secondly, if you can't agree on it, the court is going to tell you to sell the property in the open market and the profit, if any, to be split between the two of you. And it doesn't matter if it's in both your names. It doesn't matter who's been paying the bond all these years. That's irrelevant. If the fact is, if the property is in both your names, the profit, if any, will be split jointly. And the third method is that what 1 and 2 that we discussed gets deferred for some time, that the person will live in the property for 2 years or 72 months, and then it will get sold. So those are basically the three options we have as far as assets. So, and you've got to look at what each party, once you have your monthly costs, including the children's costs, then you've got to decide what you want each party going forward to contribute. Are we going to split school fees? How much is the maintenance per month for consumables? If the maintenance, let's say, per month is 10,000 per child, you can't expect the other party to pick up the whole tab. You have to pick up some of the tab. And sort of that's where you've got to sit with your attorney and take a good hard look at your finances, at your joint assets, and how the situation is going to be post-divorce. And have a realistic view of it. Don't have these unrealistic views that suddenly money is going to appear that wasn't there before. And Paula, that of course leads me on. And people always ask me this, and I'm sure they ask you this as well. Is it possible to pick up the pieces after divorce? Or how should you go about it? It's absolutely possible. But how should you go about structuring a better life for yourself post-divorce?
Yeah, I think it leads into what you've just been talking about now from a financial point of view, because it's not only the mental, emotional side of picking up the pieces, it's also the financial side as well. And one thing which is why I send my people to you first when they are coming to me and saying, I'm not sure if I should stay in my marriage anymore, if I should leave my marriage anymore, because we've all heard horror stories about how messy and costly divorces can be, but also in terms of child maintenance and how they can survive and contribute. And I've had both men and women coming to me in terms of, how do I afford to move on financially because I've got to pay child maintenance. And in some cases, I've even got to still pay maintenance to my spouse. So before I answer that, I think this plays a key role. How can you give us some insights in terms of how maintenance is actually calculated?
Well, the court will look at those three main broad areas and divide maintenance: your consumables, your academic costs, and we're talking about maintenance of children now, and your medical, and then they'll look at the income differential between the two of you. So let's say the one person makes 100,000 Rand a month and the other person makes 50,000 Rand a month. Then that cost will be split on a 75-25 ratio. It's called the income differential between the parties. So how the maintenance split, if you and I, Paula, get divorced and we make roughly the same, that whole maintenance groups will be split 50-50. Now, there's various ways to do it. There's no set formula. If I make slightly more than you, that will be split 60-40. If I make a little bit more, 70-30. If I'm working and the other person's not employed, well, guess what? Unfortunately, it's going to be 100-0. But maintenance, if we look at Section 15 of the Maintenance Act, maintenance is a joint responsibility between the parties. You can't just expect the one party to pick up the tab for everything. You have to contribute something. And last night at 8 o'clock at night, I was having this fight with somebody whose ex called me up and says, so-and-so and so, and at 8 o'clock on a Friday night, and he's not contributing. Well, then I asked her, but what are you contributing? And then it came out that she's contributing nothing. So I helped her right there in that Section 15 of the Maintenance Act says it's a joint responsibility. You cannot expect the other person, whether they've had an affair or not, now as punishment, they have to pick up the tab for everything. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
So it's based on the income differential between the parties. So first thing you do is you work out the actual cost of the children. Then it's split based on the income differential between the parties. Now, spousal maintenance is another question altogether. Spousal maintenance is something that's dropped off quite considerably. The old model of the woman staying at home and raising the children and the husband going out and earning the bacon, well, those days are gone. unless you've got a tremendous amount of money, or you got your money the old-fashioned way, i.e. you inherited it, both parties have to go out and work. A bond is usually in the name of both parties. So both parties are working, both parties have to contribute, and the thing that mommy sits at home and now receives bags of cash while dad has to work, those days are gone. Life has just become too expensive and people cannot survive on one income anymore. If they do, they're struggling. So both parties have to contribute. Maintenance is a joint responsibility, and generally the non-custodial parent has to make a cash payment towards the custodial parent. Now, which is also quite common these days, is that custody, if the people live close to each other, geographically close to each other, custody of the children is shared. 1 week with the one party, 1 week with the other party, and they go to the same school. They don't have to change schools in between. Then the cash component for consumables falls away, because generally the children use the same amount of consumables at each party. They flush the toilet around about the same time. They use the same amount of electricity, data, internet, drink the same amount of coffee, and eat the same amount of food. And also then, coming back to spousal maintenance. Spousal maintenance these days, because both parties are working, spousal maintenance now has a sunshine clause that unless it's a marriage of 30 or 40 years where the person has devoted their life to you and they are now about to retire or are retiring, then the court will give lifelong maintenance. But lifelong maintenance then will only be 10 years. If the person is 60, 65, lifelong maintenance is not going to be for another 100 years. Spousal maintenance generally now, if both parties are working, where you're helping the other party to get back on your feet, because marriage, there's a reciprocal duty of support. Obviously, when you get divorced, that reciprocal duty of support ends, and there's usually a 6 or 8 month or a 12-month clause. But for 12 months, you will get to keep the party on your medical aid. For 8 months, you will make a contribution to their rental amount, because they are struggling. Their rent is 15 grand a month and they can only afford 8. So you will make up the shortfall for 8 months. You will assist them with their medical aid, and you will assist them with maybe their vehicle insurance, but there's a sunshine clause, there's a cutoff period, because both parties are now working, both parties are employed, and both parties should be financially independent of each other. That's one of the objects of divorce, is to untangle you. You will always be co-parents, for better or for worse, for the rest of your life, but you need to be financially untangled. That's one of the objects of divorce.
Yeah, and it's often something that comes up in the sessions that I have with clients. As you know, I work both with men and women, and I run men's and women's programs, and it's conversations that I have in both spaces. So I get both sides of the story, just like you do as well. And when it comes to picking up the pieces, there is the financial aspect. And as you said, one of the top 5 things that couples argue about is finances. And from an employee wellness, well-being, mental health perspective, financial stress is one of the biggest stresses that individuals take with them into the workplace. And it's very, very much integrated in terms of, if I'm not in a good space mentally and emotionally in my personal space, whether we like it or not, we take home to work and we take work to home. It's going to affect my performance in the workplace and my focus and my ability to be productive and creative, and vice versa. If I'm going through a bad space in my work life, we tend to bring it home into our loved ones as well. So finances and the stress of that, and then the emotional stress and the upheaval of your stability, your place of safety being the marriage home, is that they now have to start over in terms of a single-minded perspective. So I'm now single, I'm not part of a couple anymore, and to start thinking as a single person, because depending on how long you've been together in your relationship, you've always taken someone else into consideration. So a story I can share with you is I was working with, this was a couple of years ago, someone that had been in a very long marriage. I think they were married for 17 years, if I recall. And they ended up getting divorced, and she was coming to me to work through picking up the pieces. And she couldn't make a simple decision about buying new coffee mugs for her place. She struggled with that because they'd made decisions together, or they had always bounced the decisions off each other.
Not to drink tea.
Peter, I've seen your message. I will answer your message shortly. So it's depending on how long you've been together and how intertwined your relationship has been. It's now having to do simple things like that, like make decisions on your own. And it can be for the most basic things that you can struggle, as opposed to also big things like buying a new house, or moving into a new place, having to downsize your car, maybe buy a new car, things like that, where, their mental and emotional stress, and that comes from that. So yeah, it's really is around having to pick up the pieces and start over as a single person. First of all, in terms of the status, and often people fear getting divorced because of that status of I'm now a divorcee, and having to, when you fill in forms, tick that box that says I'm divorced. A lot of people struggle with that, either from a faith, religion perspective, or a cultural perspective, or just because of their conditioning and how they've grown up in that divorce is a no-no, it's a taboo thing. So things like that, having to now manage responsibilities, so the joint custody thing that you were talking about, and sharing custody, and having to be responsible in a single-minded perspective, whereas before when we were together it was a joint perspective. So even though we're co-sharing and we're co-parenting and we've got joint custody, I'm still responsible, and I'm doing things on my own, solo, as a solo parent or single parent. So for example, if I've got kids for the weekend, I've got to look after the kids myself. I can't take 5 minutes or 10 minutes time out and let my partner look after them or take care of the kids to give me time out. I've got the kids 24/7 over that period while the kids are with me, or vice versa. So it's the support structures that need to be put in place. And then eventually when I'm ready to move on, how do I start putting myself out there and dating again and getting into the next relationship? Some of the things that I deal with when it comes to helping someone. And Peter, just to answer your question, so Peter's question is, what is your basic model or process to helping in the case of possible divorce? So if I can bring that in and answer that for you now, Peter, is similar to Shando, I sit down and I try and understand what are the things that have contributed or brought the client into my space, and what's going on for them. Because as I said before, a relationship doesn't break down overnight, it's over time. So I go and I try and assess with them, where did it start, what's contributed and led to where they are now, and then what do they want to do about it? Because both of them have different perspectives. So I try and get an understanding of the different perspectives in terms of, where are you at? Where are you at? What do you want? What do you want? Can we find a middle ground? And then what are the steps that we need to put in place to find that middle ground? With no guarantees of the outcome that it's going to solve their problems, because I make it very clear up front that I'm not God. I can't save the relationship. I can't fix it. They have to do the work, but I can certainly be a catalyst for them and help them by understand what's gone wrong, what's got them to where they are. If they keep doing more of that, they're going to end up in Shando's office. If they want to change things, these are the things that they need to look at changing to re-image and reinvent their relationship in terms of the ideal that they say they want. But they have to do the work. I'm not sure if that helps answer your question, Peter.
Okay.
Awesome, thanks.
And Paula, if I can just come in here, and this is something you and I talk about quite a bit, is co-parenting. Obviously, when your relationship as husband and wife ends, if there's children, your relationship as parents does not end. And that will continue until you take your last breath and the other party takes their last breath. Now, in the practical terms in a divorce, if the divorce settles or the court makes an order, there's a section called a parenting plan. Now, the parenting plan deals with when you have the custodial and the non-custodial parent, and if I can talk about the rights of a normal divorced father, it's usually the mother that gets custody. However, if the children are a bit older and if they're boys, then quite often they will go live with the father, because there comes a certain stage when the boys are bigger than the mother, physically bigger than the mother, and the mother can't discipline them anymore. They won't listen to her anymore, and they rebel against the central authority. We are mammals, so whether you're a penguin or a lion, at some stage, or a chimpanzee, you are going to rebel against the central authority, and that's generally when the chimp or the lion gets kicked out. So there's going to come a stage when you, especially if it's boys, and it's quite common, they're physically bigger than the mother, and the mother just can't deal with them anymore. Not because they're bad boys or she's a bad mother. It's just one of those things. They're bigger than her. They won't listen to her. If they say, she says, give me your phone, and they say no, and they hold it above their head and they say, you get it. And she can't. It's a sort of at that stage when she packs him and takes him to their father and says, try that with your father. So when the boys are these days, when boys are older, they generally go live with their father, and that's a good thing because they need to be taught how to be a man. And also, as I said, shared custody is quite common these days. 1 week, if the parents geographically live close to each other. Then you have the other situation, which is, let's call it the rights of a normal divorced father, where the children are more of tender years, and I hate that saying, but it is quite prevalent. Then usually the mother is the custodial parent, and the father will see them. You have alternate and non-alternate weeks. In alternate weeks, the father will have a sleepover or visits during the week in the evening, and either return them to the mother, or they'll sleep over and he'll take them to school. And then in the non-alternate weeks, it'll be from a weekend. You could quite possibly collect them at school at a Friday and return them on a Monday to school, or a Sunday night. So that's generally how that works. So there's a part of the divorce, either order or settlement agreement, which will then deal with who sees what, when and where, what happens in vacation, the maintenance, how that's split up, and also in case of a dispute, what alternate dispute mechanisms are there to resolve the dispute before you go to court. And that would be called mediation. That's where you come in and other mediators potentially come in. So before you run to a court, and the Children's Act is quite clear on this, you must mediate before you litigate, unless it's an urgent situation where the children are exposed to abuse or neglect. Then you can go to court immediately. There's no questions about it. But if you have a dispute over, and this is always a dispute that comes up, for instance, the father wants to take the children to Europe for the Christmas vacation. It's been agreed. He then has purchased the ticket, and then the mother takes a look at the new girlfriend and decides, I don't like her, and therefore the children are not going with you anymore. And this happens a lot. I don't like your new partner, and I therefore do not want the children to go with you. And you've already purchased the plane tickets, booked the place in Mauritius, and you're going to get quite a financial loss. And I then have to run to court because the parties are at a loggerhead, and the court then has to decide. Now, the yardstick for anything involving children is not the parents' convenience, it's the best interest of the children. So if the person then wants to travel with the children overseas, and it would be nice for them to go to Euro Disney, it would be in their best interest. However, if the father wants to take the children to a war zone or a malaria zone, that would not be in their best interest, and that's a valid reason. But saying that the children can't travel with you on vacation, that's always the big one. Just because you don't like the new partner is not a valid reason. So yeah, co-parenting it's taken up in a parenting plan, which has to be approved by the court. And the good thing what the parenting plan is supposed to do, it takes out the quality of the relationship between the parents as a factor for the one parent seeing the children. So if you and I are divorced and you're angry at me or I'm angry at you, I can't say to you, oh, you can't see the children, which was the old chestnut where everybody used to go. Oh, you haven't paid maintenance, or I don't like your new partner, or we had a screaming match last night and now you can't collect the children this weekend. That's what a parenting plan does. It takes that as a reason, you or me being angry at each other, it takes that away. I cannot use that as an excuse for you not to see the children. And should I do so, I would be in contempt of court, and I would then be hauled to court and have to explain to the court why exactly it is not in the children's best interest. And if I can't do that sufficiently, then I'm going to get saddled with a cost order against me and possibly a criminal sanction.
And this is where, when I'm working with couples, I make it very clear up front when it comes to trying to fix or resolve the relationship or rebuild or repair the relationship, is that both parties are equally accountable and equally responsible for contributing to the relationship and the relationship space, and keeping that space safe. And when I talk about contributing to the relationship, I'm not only talking financially, I'm talking mentally, emotionally, etc. And helping couples understand, because often couples get stuck in the space around who's contributing, and they're generally referring to finances. And it's helping couples understand that we contribute to in a relationship or a marriage in many different ways. Things like helping with the household chores, helping with the kids, helping paying the bills, helping with running errands, helping with family members, etc. And then contributing to the emotional safety of the relationship. And then when it comes to kids, if I'm working with a couple and they've now decided that this isn't for them and they actually do want to go down that divorce road, it's helping them put a solid emotional foundation in place, especially where kids are concerned, because they are going to be part of each other's lives for the rest of their lives. And especially when it comes to important occasions like birthdays or Christmases or graduations and weddings and stuff like that. So it's in the kids' best interests, but how do they show kids that even though mommy and daddy don't love each other anymore and we don't want to be married to each other, we can still be respectful towards each other, we can still be civil towards each other, and we can still show that we can be friends. Because children's emotional foundation is formed within the first 7 years of their life, and thereafter it is reinforced by the environment that they are exposed to. And it ultimately plays out in their relationships when they get into adulthood with the relationship dynamics and relationship patterns that play out. So I make couples very aware of the impact that they're having on children, particularly in terms of an emotional impact and the emotional stability. So it's not just impacting them on an emotional level, it's impacting the kids as well. And sometimes this is where I think you, Shando, you and I often refer kids to our network of colleagues to help them,
Yes.
depending on the age, whether it's play therapy or other forms of therapy, to help kids process and deal with what's going on, because they do not have the emotional vocabulary or maturity to deal and process with things the way we do as adults. And often kids will act out their emotions. So the younger the kids are, it will be things like temper tantrums or panic attacks or anxiety or attachment. Yeah, all of those things will play out. And that's when parents really need to get kids help as well.
Well, Peter, if I can just come to your question, is when do I refer people to Paula? Two basic instances. One, where I'm not convinced that their marriage is broken irretrievably. They've hit a speed bump and they should get over themselves and get on with it. That's the one when I'm not convinced their marriage is over. And as I said before, a good divorce lawyer will try and talk you out of divorce, actually, because it's such a terrible thing to go through. Unless there's obviously been addiction or violence, then I'm all for it. So that's the one. And the other one is post-divorce or during divorce. A lot of people, and I myself struggled here because I got divorced after 20 years, is adjusting to your new reality. Like you said, doing things alone, sitting alone, missing your children, those kind of things. It sucks. And how not to, when you're in those moments, not to become self-destructive, to go out and drink too much, get involved in a fight, just so you can feel better. I mean, I come from a generation where if you, like I say, being ex-military, if you feel bad, you go get drunk and you go get involved in a fight. It's not good for you. So that's when I send people to Paula when they struggle to adjust to their new reality. And during a divorce is like someone's death. There's phases you go through. It's important you go through those phases. The first phase is disbelief. I can't believe this is happening. This isn't happening to me. It's happening to someone else. The second phase is anger. How could this person do this to me? The third phase is, and here I might be messing it up. The first phase is acceptance, where you accept, okay, this has now happened. And the fourth phase is a sort of indifference, when you become almost optimistic about the future again. Okay, it happened. Let's get on with it. But a lot of times people get stuck in that anger phase. And when they get stuck in that anger phase, their behavior, and I'm speaking from personal experience here, their behavior can become quite self-destructive. And that's when I send people to Paula to get through that anger phase. Because if you are constantly angry and bitter, you will ruin whatever other relationships you have in your life. Your relationship with your children, your relationship with your mother and father, your relationship with the people that love you. You as a person become toxic, and you poison everyone and everything around you.
And when I'm working with couples, it's I believe that every relationship can be turned around if the couple is willing to do the work. I do caution them that it's a process. It's not going to be fixed overnight, because it didn't take them overnight to get to me. It's taken them years to get to me, or a period of time to get to me. And they have to work through all of that stuff first to turn it around. So it is a process if they're willing to commit and buy into the process. And to work with them and help them empower themselves to deal with it and work with it. And I tell them straight up front, it's very easy to do the work when you're sitting in my office and sitting with me. But the real test comes when you walk out the door. How are you going to apply all the tools and everything, the insights that I've shared with you here? Because that's where the real test comes. You've got to do the work in order to have the successful marriage. And I can't come live with you and be your referee as much as you want me to. You guys have to do it yourselves. And that's part of the growth and the development and the learning. But where I do say to someone, the very few times that I have told someone to leave a relationship or a marriage is when there is abuse. I do not condone any form of abuse, whether it's sexual, mental, emotional, physical, financial abuse. Nobody deserves to be abused on any level. And if there is abuse, I send them straight to Shando, and he works with them from that.
Yes, and I help them with abuse by abusing the other party. Whoever makes it to me first wins. Yeah. No, I don't mean to be flippant about it, but divorce is a very, very traumatic process. I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. It's really not nice. And it's to be avoided. But like I say, if you're going to do it, then rather just do it properly. Take a hard, long, realistic look at your finances, where you are, how you got to be there. And quite often than not, the area that people are most dishonest with each other about during a marriage is finances. The shoes were always on sale. The golf bag was always on sale. When it wasn't. People actually buy things and hide them from their spouse. I mean, money is a great source of dishonesty. And now, one of the hard things in divorce is you've got to start being honest about your finances. And people lie to themselves about their money as well, about how much they have, how they'll be able to afford things. Oh, no, I'll get over it. I'll make the loan now. Things will be better in the future. Or maybe they will, and maybe they won't. But people are extremely dishonest about finances, and especially dishonest with themselves. And quite frankly, one of the big shocks in a divorce is people see how financially far gone they are, how deep in debt they are, how they're living from paycheck to paycheck. And not because they're bad people, but it's almost like gaining weight. You know, it happens incrementally. It happens, you put in a little bit of weight, a little bit of weight, a little bit of weight, and within 5 years, you're obese. So it takes a while, but people are like that about finances. They ignored it, borrow a little bit more here, lie a bit more there, borrow some more there, make a quick loan from a friend. And before you know it, you're really, really in financial trouble. And of course, when you have to go through a divorce, one of the hard parts is looking at your finances, because you'll find that quite often the state of your marriage mirrors the state of your finances. They actually go hand in hand. I find that quite often. If your marriage is on the rocks, your finances is always also on the rocks. And when it's a time, but one of the positives out of divorce is that you have a chance now to re-engineer your life from the ground up. Literally, you can start your life completely over and not make the same mistakes. Make all new mistakes, but not make the same mistakes. Learn from it. Those things you wanted to do. You wanted to travel. You wanted to do that. You wanted to do this. You wanted to lose weight. You wanted to run a marathon. Guess what? Now's the time. You wanted to get your finances in order. Now is actually the time for you to do it. So a lot of times divorce can be a second lease in life. You can go from a situation where you were desperately unhappy to a situation where you are mildly unhappy. No, I'm just joking. To a situation where you can actually reinvent yourself and be better. And those things you wanted to do, write a book, go to the ballet, you can now have a chance to engineer your life that those things are now possible. You don't need permission to do them anymore. And that can be quite liberating. And you can also redesign your finances. That in itself can be quite liberating. So every dark cloud has a silver lining. The silver lining with divorce is within a 12-month period, I always say to people, when it's in the middle of winter, when summer comes around, your life will be very, very different. And you get to decide how it's going to be different. And if you take that attitude, I'm in a bad situation now, but you know what? Difficult roads lead to beautiful destinations. They always do. If you're willing to do the hard yards, when you get out that valley of tears, in the Bible, they call it Mara, the valley of tears. When you walk through that valley of tears, there is Eden on the other side, but you've got to walk through that valley of tears. You can't deny it.
Yeah. And that's, so I just want to say to any of the other people on the call or on the webinar, if you do have any questions, please unmute yourself and ask, or please pop it in the chat group if you want to do that because I'm obviously aware of how much time we have left. But yeah, so Shando, to pick up on what you say, you know, when I'm working with couples, I do tell them that it's not going to be an easy journey to turn their relationship around. It is hard work because they've allowed it to get to the position and the place that it's in, and they have to do the hard work to get out of that valley, so to speak.
The hard yards.
They've got to do the hard work, and they are going to. It's a process, it's a journey. But the beautiful thing, as you've also said, is starting over. Is they can recreate a whole new relationship that they want, and change what wasn't working in their old relationship and create something beautiful and going forward. So it's beautiful both ways, depending on which path they want to choose. Do they want to go down this path and repair their relationship, or do they want to go down this path and start over again as a single person?
Yeah, and I can say, just jumping in there, some of the most rewarding days I've had in my practice is when people reconcile on the steps of the court. And I've actually seen that happen. And those are not financially rewarding days, but they emotionally some of the most rewarding days I've had, where people in court say, listen, I don't want to get divorced. I'm sorry, I messed up. Please reconsider. And the other person says, you know what, I've been thinking the same thing. And that for me is that's actually funny enough. That's what, like a friend of mine was a special forces sniper, and I asked him, what's the best shot you ever took? And he said, no, the best shot I ever took was the one I didn't take. And he told me about a situation where he didn't shoot somebody. And it's like, in the best for me, the best divorces are actually the ones that don't happen, where the people actually reconcile. And then they've got a much more realistic view of what's expected, what's needed, and how difficult. People are complex. Relationships are difficult. And you know what they say, the old saying is, life's tough. No one gets out alive. Now, it's true with divorces and marriages. They are difficult. People are complex. People have egos. People get hurt. People feel wronged about things that you do or things that you didn't do. And so to navigate that minefield and to stay together against the brutality of life. Life is brutal. And to stay together against the brutality of life and to try and raise children and build a society and as a couple, as a team. I tell you what, it's not for sissies. As my father said to me when I got married, he said to me, now you'll know why I look so old. So he was right, you know.
Peter, I see you wanted to ask a question.
Yeah, I want to ask about the third party. And there's two aspects of it. The one is if it's sort of a recent happening, you know, sort of, yeah. And then on the other hand, if it's been a secret thing that has been happening for, you know, months, years, and they come to you for counseling, or they come to you, Shando, for you know, yeah, it's over. Let's finish the matter.
If I can jump in there first, Peter. Peter, if they come to me and if they ask, is it really over? Then I'm already of the opinion it's not really over. And quite often it's over for the one side or the party that comes to see me. But the other party, or the party that comes to see me says it's over. But the other party, when we contact them, if they're unrepresented, they say it's not over. Then I will look. One of the first reasons I ask people is, why are you getting divorced? And relationships are built on trust. Now, once the trust is broken, it's difficult to come back from that. It really is. You know, generally when someone is involved in an affair, the other person, their partner, is the last to find out. Everyone's actually known. Their friends have known, the best friends have known. And that sense of betrayal, it's not just, oh, I'm betrayed by you, but your best friend Mike also knew for years. I mean, there are photographs of you all four together eating out at a restaurant or stuff like that. So that sense of betrayal is immense. That's the one thing. So that sense of trust is broken. Can you come back from that? You can, but it is going to take a hell of a lot of work, and there's going to be a lot of hurt and a lot of things said which you're not going to like, and they're all going to be true, pretty much, about what you've done to the family. So it's not nice, but you can come back from it. What I find is, what's more important than, if one party loses respect for the other party, then it's almost irretrievable. So if you continuously come home drunk, on a Tuesday, you fall down drunk already. Your wife can't go anywhere with you because it's an embarrassment. She knows she's going to have to apologize to someone, stuff like that. Once that parties lose respect for each other, then I haven't seen people come back from that. I've seen people come back from betrayal, breach of trust. I've seen people come back from that. But once one party loses respect for the other party, and that's a deep thing. It's like a dog that continuously bites you. You don't want that dog anymore. You don't want to be around that person anymore. You don't want to see them anymore. Just seeing them upsets you, sort of thing. It's a deep, you don't love them, you despise them. Once you get to that stage, it's difficult. Once you lose your respect for that person, then I'd say, people say love is the tree that everything grows out from. It's not true. I find that respect is a tree that everything grows out from, including love. So if you've lost your basic respect for that person as an individual, then I'd say pack it in. It's not coming back.
And research has shown that it can take up to 2 years to rebuild the trust in a relationship. Now, obviously, every couple is different, and it depends on how much work they do to start rebuilding that trust. So it's not impossible. But it does take time to rebuild the trust, and forgiveness is a big part of that, in terms of forgiving and letting go and being able to move on. But definitely, when the respect is gone, pretty much everything else goes out the window with that, and it's very hard to come back from that. So I hope that's helped you, Peter, and answered your questions. I don't know if anybody else has got any other questions. Please feel free to unmute or pop on the chat group. Did that answer your question, Peter?
Yeah, to a large extent. Yeah, it did. Thank you.
Trust is a big thing. And in fact, in any relationship, not even just romantic relationships, there's actually very little difference between our personal relationships and relationships in the workplace. The core foundations and the principles are the same. You're going to need communication. You're going to need respect. You're going to need trust. You're going to need to be able to resolve conflict. But the emotions are very different. Our personal relationships are much more emotionally charged because they're driven by a romantic love when it comes to our partners, and an unconditional love when it comes to our children and our family. Whereas in the workplace, it's a different kind of love. It's love for the brand or the organization that we work with, or the people we work with, the actual job role that we do, or the industry that we're in. Otherwise, we wouldn't get up and go to work every day, right? But that doesn't mean we don't have bad days in the workplace, and with people in the workplace, we do, just like we have bad days at home. It's part of life. Learning to navigate that is a key component to successful relationships, whether it's personal or professional.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Okay. So, Shando, it was great picking your brains again, as always.
It's always a short conversation when you pick my brains, yeah.
And I hope that's been insightful and it's helped everyone. And I will send out Shando and my details. And if you do want to chat to either one of us about anything further, please do feel free to get in touch. We will be looking at doing another webinar in a couple of weeks' time. So if there are specific topics or questions that you'd like us to answer, please let us know what those are. We'll be sure to cover them. And I'm doing a webinar with one of my other colleagues next weekend around couples and currencies. So currencies being finances is one of the things that couples fight over, but we're going to be talking about the other kinds of currencies in relationships, as well as the basics around finances that trip couples up. And so things like basic budgeting, how to cut costs, especially now with a lot of couples experiencing financial stress with either salaries being reduced and or having lost a job because of current COVID situations.
Paula, if I can just quickly jump in there. I see Elise is asking, if you have a 12-year-old, at what age can they decide to stay with a parent? Section 10 of the Children's Act says, based on a child's age, stage of development and maturity. So it's very sort of nebulous and out there, but what it comes down to, the older the child gets, the more of a say they have. And generally what you find when a parenting plan is drawn up about care and contact, it sort of has, it mirrors the developmental phases of a child. Where ages 0 to 3, the child is an infant. 3 to sort of 6, when they start going to sort of proper formal schooling, it's a toddler or a young child. Then you have your preteen, your 6 to 11 or 10, and then you've got your 12 onwards when it's a teenager. And pretty much a teenager, if a teenager says, I want to go and stay with the other parent, it cannot be ignored for too long. Of course, then there might be various reasons for that. The one parent can certainly influence the child to say that because they know it will greatly upset the other parent and hurt them. And or the yardstick is still, is it in the child's best interest? If the child wants to go stay with the father because there he gets to play Xbox all the time and smoke marijuana, then it will not be in their best interest. It will be on the child thinks that I'm going to have an easier ride there and get more stuff. So at the end of the day, the older the child gets, the louder their voice, but the yardstick always remains the child's best interest. So if the other party then says, no, you cannot stay with the child, they go stay with the other parent, they must be able to justify it that it would not be in the child's best interest.
Thanks, Shando. Thank you, everyone. I hope that's been informative and helpful. I'm looking forward to connecting with you on our next webinars. If you signed up for this one, you will be on the mailing list, so you will get the details of our next webinar. But please also let us know if there are specific topics or specific things that you'd like us to cover as well. We want to obviously make it as interactive and as valuable as possible.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone.